Tropical Storm Calvin intensifying in the Eastern Pacific on tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. And now the latest around the wide world of tropics. Tropical Weather Bulletin for July 30. Well, we have a tropical storm now in the Eastern Pacific, which was named not long after our last tropical weather bulletin, number 28 for the year. And we're code orange now for a developing system near the Philippines right now in the Western Pacific. Things are warming up there across the whole Northern Hemisphere, actually, as you're about to see. In the Atlantic, we're now running with 60% for an area of interest in the subtropics, day 43 of hurricane season, and it's likely now to become either a subtropical or tropical storm as it meanders around that region between the eastern seaboard and the Azores. In the Eastern Pacific, day 61 of hurricane season, we've got Calvin, which is gradually intensifying, likely to reach hurricane status, and two areas of interest now that we've marked behind it, both at low chance at the moment, but later on down the line those chances could start to increase. In the Western Pacific, we've now marked three different systems, and you can see that's 70% chance that we've got across the Philippines right now that could develop on the other side as it enters the South China Sea, and those two 10% areas nearby. Elsewhere, not much going on in the North Indian Ocean though. It's still quiet, and we're still probably not going to see too much happening over there, but a few areas of cloudiness which is producing rainfall over the Indian region. Well then, in the last 24 hours over the satellite imagery, you'll see a few spots that have been blowing up in terms of rainfall. Look out for those red zones. You can clearly see Calvin, but mainly that system over the Philippines, which is producing a really large amount of rain over Luzon right now in those last few hours. So really something to be looking at over there. Could be a flooding event. Well, here is Calvin. It's looking pretty good, it has to be said. You can see the depression in the middle where it's not quite an eye yet, but it's a clearing with the clouds rotating around it, looking much better on the southeastern side than it is on the northwest, but it's looking decent. Infrared maybe not quite so appealing on that imagery there, but certainly good value for at least 50 miles per hour, probably getting to higher amounts now, and I think we'll be seeing a hurricane possibly within the next 24 hours, but certainly within 48. It's still over good sea surface temperatures, and it's staying at a fairly low latitude, which means that it's got a good bit of time, maybe 3 or 4 days, before it really starts to hit colder sea surface temperatures and weakens. You can see around it as well the rest of the Eastern Pacific, not very organized, looking out further east towards those other systems. To be fair though, they haven't actually been designated fixable by this point. And looking towards the Atlantic, a few other areas with thunderstorms blowing up over Central America, and the Atlantic system, which isn't really doing very much at the moment but could be on its way. Eastern Pacific, warm sea surface temperatures over 30 degrees Celsius in a few spots off the coast of Mexico, but really tapering off towards the west. The Atlantic piping hot around Florida and the Bahamas and the Gulf of Mexico, well over 30 degrees there, pushing 32 or more in a few spots, and up the Gulf Stream, really warm temperatures up towards the Carolinas, the Outer Banks and beyond. The rest of Atlantic looking good as well, they're out at sea, warm temperatures. Eastern Pacific, a large area of 30 to 32 degrees Celsius waters in the South China Sea, extending almost as far as Hong Kong and southern Taiwan, and further towards the northeast there as well. Really warm temperatures, up to Japan 26 degrees in a few spots along the coast. The Bay of Bengal also looking decent with warm temperatures, and the Arabian Sea, a little area that's popped up there over 30 degrees Celsius at sea, and also near the coast of Oman and the United Arab Emirates, very warm SSTs. Southwest Indian Ocean still cooling in its winter months there near Madagascar and the Australian region, even a few spots off Indonesia now falling below 26 degrees Celsius. And in the South Pacific also fading away slowly but surely across the coast of Fiji. Anomalies, they're above average though, particularly in the South China Sea where we saw those warm temperatures very much above average. Same story near the southern part of Florida and the Bahamas and the eastern Atlantic. Plenty of spots above 3 degrees above the normals, and in the eastern Pacific a few spots in mainly further east that are above average, and obviously the El Nino effect there down in the equator region, well above average over there as well. In the Atlantic, looking at oceanic heat content, all those red zones, really high amounts of energy and still quite a few spots up the Gulf Stream as well. Eastern Pacific looking okay in a few spots, mainly along the coast of Mexico, but one or two areas further out, that's very low latitude. Western Pacific looking mighty as well off the coast of the Philippines, not as much in the South China Sea, but still plenty of energy there as well. Computer models, this is the GFS for the next 5 days, and it is depicting this system to form quite clearly there. GFS is still the most aggressive out of all of the other models, but pretty much we've got a fair agreement that this will get at least a depression status. Whether it gets a storm status, I think that will happen as well, but 60% I think is a fair read of this right now, moving northwards and then meandering towards the east and then maybe towards the south later on, doing eventually maybe a full 360. There's Calvin continuing west-northwestwards, becoming a hurricane there, and GFS thinks it might have a chance of getting stronger than that, maybe category 2. The pressure peak on that forecast is 970 millibars, and eventually it makes its way towards Hawaii, and there's potentially those two systems behind it that I mentioned that start to form in the later period of that 5-day interval, and you can see it there towards the end, a little bit of rotation starting to appear in the middle and on the right. In the Western Pacific, looking out for one or two systems here, of course, that looks like the main one will be this 70% into the South China Sea. GFS now looks like it might have a good read on this, and then gradually moving towards the west-northwest. That second system also forms just north of Taiwan, but it's only the GFS that really has that happening so far, so I wouldn't really bet on that. But certainly there could be a front that moves through there and causes strong winds and heavy rainfall through Taiwan and along the east coast of China. But this system, this potential typhoon moving through southern China there towards Hainan Island. But the main worry about this is how it will enhance the rainfall in the area. We already saw that it's producing large amounts of rainfall right now, but overall in the next 7 days, a few spots in the Philippines could get extremely high rainfall amounts. Not all of it to do with the typhoon, but possibly to do with the monsoonal region as well. But look at that, potentially 24 inches of rain on Mindoro there, and 19 on Panay, and getting up to 14 inches in Luzon. So 24 inches, that's 600 millimeters, 10 inches being 250, and look up there in Korea as well, 16 inches possible there as well, 400 millimeters from that secondary system. May or may not be a tropical cyclone, maybe a front, or just a strong low pressure system, but moves through there and delivers a lot of rainfall. Longer range, day 5 to 10, we've got these potential 3 systems. Calvin limps across the Hawaiian Islands and struggles through, continues westwards. The third system ends up developing into a hurricane there. The second one in the middle doesn't really do very much, a small system that doesn't do much in terms of intensity. And then we follow the track of Calvin, which does continue. Does it lose its center? Possibly, but it regains it later on towards the international date line and eventually into the Western Pacific, but as a very weak system. What happens in the South China Sea? There's that other system that moves into Vietnam, and then we've got another system in the Philippine Sea that becomes a mature typhoon, and then that third enormous tropical cyclone that forms out of the monsoon in the South China Sea. Question marks over whether all that will happen, but certainly it looks like we might be in for an active period now in the Western Pacific. It's been waiting a while to really get itself going, and it does usually happen in July. But look at that, a potentially strong typhoon for Luzon later on. Scan the barcode and that will transport you to the Force 13 merch store where we have all our usual items and full season and individual animations on request. We also have our still waiting for Hone t-shirts. We could probably build a theme park for Hone before it manages to form. In the Scilly Range, there's a little feature there near Cape Verde that moves through. That's a brief tropical cyclone spin up, and it survives for a little bit longer but ends up weakening to a depression and devolves back into an open wave further on as it moves towards the west. But that's an interesting thing that happens there on the GFS. But I wouldn't put much faith in that one happening yet. There is also, I don't think we fully saw it, but also a potential other system in the Western Caribbean Sea that might end up forming near Central America, but again, we're not giving much chance for that. Western Pacific, what else happens? This strong typhoon moves into land, probably a Category 4 landfall. It continues westwards. It re-strengthens again, at least Category 3, maybe 4, into Hainan and onto northern Vietnam. That is a long way out though. I wouldn't put much stock into that yet. And then 3 other systems behind that in the Philippine Sea, one of them becoming a typhoon near the end of that. So potentially, how many is that? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 storms in the next 16 days, according to the GFS, in the Western Pacific alone. You can talk about all of that on our Discord partner server, discord.gg/force13 for tropical weather and general weather chat from around the world. And we'd love to have you there. In the meantime, back 4 years to 2019, and we had one of the sloppiest hurricanes that I've tracked, Hurricane Barry, which peaked as a minimal Category 1 as it approached the coast of Louisiana, the western part of the coast. And we also had Tropical Depression 4E, which didn't manage to get a name in the Eastern Pacific that year, in between storms in that basin. The Western Pacific was fairly quiet, but there were a few areas of interest to monitor at this particular point. Image of Barry there on this day in 2019. Back to today, and the next name in the Atlantic is Don. It might be on its way. In the Eastern Pacific, it's Dora. And in the Central Pacific, of course, it is still Hone. 28 storms so far this year around the world. In the Western Pacific, the next name is Talim, and in the North Indian Ocean, it's Tej. But whether Talim will come from this Philippine system is still somewhat unknown, but chances are now looking good. And in the Southern Hemisphere, in the Southwest Indian Ocean, a new naming list, Alvaro is next up. In the Australian region, it's Jasper, and the South Pacific, it's Lola. That's all from tonight's Tropical Weather Bulletin. We'll be back again tomorrow night.